All right, let's just get right into it. Whenever we think of epic medieval travel, the name Marco Polo is usually the very first one that springs to mind, right? But today, we're going to explore a journey that absolutely dwarfs Marco Polo's in both distance and scope. Welcome to this explainer on the incredible 30-year epic of Ibn Battuta. Picture this, it's 1325, and a 22-year-old scholar leaves his home in Morocco for a pilgrimage, and he essentially doesn't stop traveling for 3 decades. We are talking about an estimated 75,000 miles. He saw the world from West Africa all the way to China, and his written accounts offer us this incredibly vibrant front row seat to what the 14th century globe actually looked like. To make sense of this massive itinerary, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. 1. The call to adventure. 2. Faith in the Middle East. 3. Wonders of the Indian Ocean. 4. The Golden Horde Steppe. And finally, 5. Into the Byzantine Empire. So, just to ground us in the sheer geographic whiplash of his early travels, in 1325, he leaves Tangier, Morocco, completely alone. By 1326, just a single year later, he's already crossed North Africa and is marveling at the megacities of Cairo and Damascus. And then, fast forward to 1332, he's literally standing at the gates of Constantinople. The speed and scale of his movement across the medieval world is, well, it's honestly just staggering. Okay, part 1, the call to adventure. Ibn Battuta was just 22 years old when he left his birthplace of Tangier. He wrote that he was swayed by an overmastering impulse within him to visit the glorious sanctuaries of Mecca and Medina. He left all his friends behind and tore himself away from his home, fully knowing how heavily it weighed upon his aging parents. This part of the journey instantly humanizes our great explorer. We so often picture these historical figures as unshakable, emotionless statues, right? But when he arrived in the city of Tunis early on in his journey, he knew absolutely no one. The locals were all warmly greeting each other, and he was just completely ignored. He actually wrote, "I was so affected by my loneliness that I could not restrain my tears and wept bitterly." It really puts you right in his shoes. You can feel the profound vulnerability and the emotional isolation of a young man so far from home. But he pushed through that isolation with some unbelievable grit, enduring the severe physical toll of 14th century travel. While making his way through Algeria, Ibn Battuta was struck by a devastating fever. His travel companions begged him to stop and rest, but he flat out refused. He actually took his turban cloth and tied himself to his saddle so that he wouldn't pass out and fall off his horse. He told his friends, "If God decrees my death, it shall be on the road with my face set toward Mecca." He was absolutely determined to literally die on the road rather than give up on his quest. Moving on to part 2, faith in the Middle East. As he traveled through Egypt and Syria, he moved into the very heart of the Islamic world. And his writings from this specific time are just bursting with the overwhelming sensory experiences and the staggering, unbelievable wealth of cities like Cairo and Damascus. In fact, he called Cairo the mother of cities, describing it as a place whose throngs surged like the waves of the sea. Now, it's totally crucial to understand the economic scale he was witnessing here, and this number hits the nail on the head. 36,000. That's the number of boats Ibn Battuta reported seeing surging on the Nile River in Cairo alone. 36,000 vessels belonging to the Sultan and his subjects, just constantly sailing up and down the river, heavily laden with goods and profitable merchandise. It was a level of bustling, massive economic activity that completely blew his mind. And that massive wealth also translated directly into the social fabric of these cities. In Damascus, he was deeply impressed by the advanced social welfare and the pious charity woven into everyday life. So one day, he sees a young slave accidentally drop and shatter a highly valuable Chinese porcelain dish. Now, the crowd didn't panic or get angry. Instead, they just calmly told the boy to gather the broken pieces and take them to the custodian of the endowments for utensils. He did exactly that, showed the broken pieces, and was handed enough money to buy a replacement so his master wouldn't beat him. Ibn Battuta called this kind of charity a mender of hearts, which just shows a remarkable level of civic compassion. He finally reaches his ultimate goal, Mecca. And his descriptions bring the city to life through these incredible sensory and cultural details. The people of Mecca were intensely charitable. For instance, at large feasts, the poor and devotees without resources were always fed first. No exceptions. Shoppers in the bazaar would hand their purchases to orphan boys, who acted as these highly trusted porters, bringing the food to their homes without ever stealing a single grain. And visually and aromatically, well, he noted the locals wore perfectly clean, snowy white clothes and used so much intense perfume that the entire mosque was literally saturated with their scent. Now, having completed his pilgrimage, he could have just gone home,
But instead, he kept going. Part 3. Wonders of the Indian Ocean. Ibn Battuta crosses the threshold into the exotic, venturing by ship through the trading hubs of East Africa and the Persian Gulf. Here, the familiar Islamic world of the Middle East gives way to entirely new landscapes, foods, and economies.
It is so fascinating to see a familiar object through the eyes of someone experiencing absolute culture shock. Ibn Battuta encounters the coconut for the very first time, and his description is this rapid-fire list of complete oddities. He notes the nut looks exactly like a man's head, with 2 eyes and a mouth. When it's green, he says the pulp inside tastes like a broiled egg. He was amazed that it yielded this deliciously sweet milk, could be boiled down into honey, and that the hairy fibers on the outside were woven into ropes used to bind entire ships together without a single iron nail. His sense of wonder here is just palpable. As he sailed the Persian Gulf, he also documented the intense and frankly highly dangerous labor of the local pearl divers. This wasn't just a simple swim. A diver would put on a tortoiseshell mask to see underwater, apply a tortoiseshell clip to his nose, tie a rope around his waist, and dive deep down to the seafloor. Down there, he'd quickly cut the shells loose from the sand with a knife, bag them up, and right as he was running out of breath, he'd tug the rope to be rapidly pulled up by his partner on the shore. It's this fascinating, dangerous economic engine that he captures in meticulous detail. From the sweltering heat of the Indian Ocean, we shift gears entirely. Part 4. The Golden Horde Steppe. Ibn Battuta travels way up north to the vast Kipchak steppe, which is modern-day southern Russia and Ukraine. This was a nomadic world ruled by Sultan Uzbek Khan, characterized by massive moving wagon cities and customs that were completely alien to our North African traveler. The culture shock of their daily life was immense. First off, the diet. They didn't eat bread. They ate a millet soup with meat, and they drank something called kumas, which is fermented mare's milk. Ibn Battuta tasted it once, found it terribly bitter, and politely passed it off to a friend. They even viewed eating sweetmeats as a total disgrace. Now, on the wealth side, horses were their absolute currency. A single Turk might own thousands of horses, and they lived in these massive wagons carrying felt tents. Because horses were their lifeblood, the law was incredibly severe. If you stole a horse, you had to return it with 9 others, or your children would be taken into slavery. If you didn't have children, you were executed. Yeah, they didn't mess around. But arguably, the greatest culture shock he experienced on the steppe was the status of women. In the North Africa and Middle East that Ibn Battuta knew so well, women were generally modest, secluded, and rarely ever left their hometowns. But out on the Turkish steppe, the women were completely unveiled. They were highly respected, they drank openly with men, and the queens, known as the khatuns, even commanded their own troops and rode in grand processions. He was absolutely astonished by this elevated public dignity. He noted that even among the common people, the women wore these elaborate conical headdresses encrusted with pearls. He literally wrote, "I saw also the wives of the merchants. Anyone seeing him would take him for one of her servants." Basically, the husband would be walking along in a simple sheep's wool cloak while his wife sat in a grand wagon attended by her maidens. It completely shattered Ibn Battuta's preconceived notions of societal norms. Part 5. Into the Byzantine Empire. While visiting the Golden Horde, Ibn Battuta manages to attach himself to the retinue of one of the Sultan's wives, a Byzantine princess named Bayalun. She was actually pregnant and traveling back to her father's empire in Constantinople to give birth. So Ibn Battuta smartly uses this royal protection to travel straight into Christian territory. But as soon as they crossed the border into the territory of the Greeks, Ibn Battuta experienced a sudden and super jarring shift in identities. The princess, who had observed Islamic customs back in the steppe, suddenly abandoned her Islamic prayers. She was given hospitality gifts of intoxicating liquors, which she drank, and swine, which she happily ate. Even the call to prayer in their camp was suddenly abolished. It was a stark, sobering realization for Ibn Battuta that he had truly left the familiar Islamic world behind and was now a total stranger in the land of the infidels, as he called them. His arrival into the Christian capital was awe-inspiring, but it was also pretty terrifying. He paints this incredible sensory picture of Constantinople. As they entered the city, the locals rang their massive church bells so loudly that Ibn Battuta claimed the very skies shook. There were blaring trumpets, bugles, and fifes literally everywhere, and at the palace gates, his party was abruptly stopped by 100 armed guards shouting, "Saracen, Saracen," demanding strict permission before this Muslim traveler was allowed to take even one more step. This entire arrival highlighted the incredibly rigid religious boundaries of the medieval world. Ibn Battuta desperately wanted to see the inside of the Hagia Sophia, the great church of the city. He noted it was like its own enclosed town, heavily guarded and full of thousands of monks. But he was stopped right at the door. He was informed that absolutely no one was allowed to enter unless they prostrated themselves before a massive golden cross at the gate. Remaining completely true to his own faith, Ibn Battuta absolutely refused to bow to the cross, and so the greatest traveler of the age never actually saw the inside of the greatest church of the age. But despite these harsh religious boundaries, he also experienced moments of profound cross-cultural respect. One day, in the streets, he happened to meet the former Emperor George, who had abdicated his throne, to become a humble monk. When the ex-king learned that Ibn Battuta had visited the holy sites of Jerusalem, the Christian monarch took the Muslim traveler's hand and laid his own hand upon Ibn Battuta's feet, saying, "I clasp the hand which has entered Jerusalem and the foot which has walked within the dome of the rock." It is just this beautiful, peaceful moment of shared reverence for the Holy Land amidst a deeply, deeply divided world.
Which brings us to our final thought, and a question I really want to leave you with. Ibn Battuta eventually made his way back home, having survived plagues, pirates, and freezing steppes, all driven by what he called that overmastering impulse. So, 700 years after he left home, what still drives our overmastering impulse to explore the unknown today? Is it the exact same curiosity? That same core desire to connect with the alien and the unfamiliar? The stories we've explored today are just a tiny fraction of his 30-year epic, but they perfectly capture a world that was as vast, complex, and beautiful as our own. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep exploring.